Welcome to episode 14 of the Give Us Time podcast, the podcast that highlights the extraordinary members of our armed forces and their families. We have a fantastic guest today. He spent 16 years in the military, starting his career in the Royal Engineers before going on to pass Special Forces selection and becoming one of the first Army soldiers to join the Special Boat Service. After leaving the military, he went on to become a double world record holder. He cycled the entire 14,000-mile length of the Pan American Highway, the longest motorable road in the world. In doing so, he became the fastest person to cycle the length of South America and completed the fastest cycle journey of the Pan American Highway, smashing the former world record by 17 days and becoming the first person ever to make the journey in under 100 days. So we are honoured to welcome Dean Stott to the podcast. Dean, thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
And joining me, as always, is Give Us Time Ambassador Scotty Derrick.
How you doing?
And Give Us Time Managing Director Rupert Forrest.
Hello.
So, Dean, just to start off, what was it like growing up, as a kid? Because you were born into a military family, is that right? So what was that like?
Yeah, known as a Pad's brat. So very much born into that lifestyle. So, so obviously it wasn't strange for us as a family to, by the time we've established ourselves in the new surroundings, start packing up again and then move to another location. So, very much almost a pilgrim from a young age. I grew up in a town called Aldershot, which at the time was the home of the British Army. So it wasn't strange to see everyone walking downtown in uniforms, seeing different cap badges, different types of uniforms. Obviously, at the time in the 80s was airborne heavy. You had 2 para there, you had 3 para there, 9 squadrons, 7 RHA. And so, when you look up in the sky, you would see the Red Devils. They would take off from my school playing field, and some stragglers would end up sometimes in the playground. You had the balloon, which was the famous balloon for the young paras that they jump out. So very much immersed in that environment, but it wasn't something I wanted to pursue myself at the time. Although I was surrounded by that, it wasn't forced down my neck that I had to, continue tradition as in my family. It was nice being in that environment. And as I said, every 3 years you got to see different areas. We were fortunate to go to Germany. My sister was born in Germany, actually. And we ended up in Bradford. My dad ended up helping out at a TA unit there, and then, back down to Aldershot again.
So what made you then want to go and join the military, and what influence did your dad have on you going and joining?
Yeah, so I actually, I giggle. I actually always wanted to be a fireman. Growing up, my father transitioned out the military when I was about 13. So we sort of left that military environment behind us and went into a little village in Surrey. So I left the military behind. I was now living within the civilian community. So I think that was something my father wanted us to do when he got out. He wanted to almost step away from that. So I didn't really then have any aspirations of the military. It was always the fire brigade, and my dad was very old school. He was a sergeant major, a Scotsman from Montrose. Fair but firm, as a lot of his friends would say. So growing up, I wasn't allowed out to play sport unless I'd done all my homework. He was very conscious that we got good grades, and I think obviously then no one in our family had gone on to college or university. So I think he had a vision and a plan for me. When I left school, I went to college. I started doing that, but I then went down to Newquay on a summer holiday. Growing up, my father used to always take us down to Cornwall on our summer holidays, and we used to go surfing. So that was where my first love from the water came from. So me and my friends went down for a 2-week holiday. Mine ended up being 6 months. I didn't come home. My father, long before mobile phones, my father then came looking for me. To say he wasn't pleased was an understatement. And so, I thought there's no point in getting into an argument with him. And, he said, well, what are you going to do now? You've wasted your education. And at the time, to be a fireman, I was still 17. Minimum age was 18. So I couldn't do that anyway. And there was a big recession back in the early 90s. We're talking 1993 when I left school. So it was like 2,000 applicants for one job within Surrey, so Surrey Fire Brigade. So you need to, obviously, your CV needs to be standing out. So mine wasn't at that age. So I told him I would join the military. It was almost a throwaway comment to silence him. And I giggled. I was expecting some warm, comforting words, and advice. Instead, I was met with I would last 2 minutes, which probably wasn't the response I was expecting. But at 65 kilos and about 5'7", I could probably see where he was coming from at the time. But that's what I did. Got home, and then on the Monday morning went to Aldershot. My father was working in Aldershot, and he just pointed me in the directions of the careers office, which was only about 400 meters from his office anyway. And as you know, with these careers offices, you tend to go in with an idea of joining the Navy, the Air Force, or the Army, and then whoever's behind the desk will try and poach you for their own unit. So I came out joining the parachute regiment, and my father's like, "You bloody not," and he marched me straight back in.
I'm actually chuckling because I was listening to that, and also I've got your book, Dean, and it's fantastic. Yeah. And the way he said it, he said, "Well, I went home and I told him I was joining," and then he marched you back down the careers office, back in again. Oh, it made me laugh.
Yeah, so but I wasn't. My father in the military, had a great career, but his was very much, we call tracksuit soldier. He was very sports orientated. So he was the Army football manager, player, and coach. So I very rarely saw him in green kit. It was always football boots and trainers. So he hadn't really. I wasn't aware, although I was immersed in that environment, I wasn't aware about the structure of the military, where the parachute regiment sat within the military, what the Royal Engineers actually did, and the 9 Squadron, which are the airborne engineers, which would support, at the time, 5 Airborne Brigade, which is now 16 Air Assault. So I wasn't aware of any of that. So he sat me down and, told me about this, and he said, well, you can go 9 Squadron, which is airborne engineers, you can go 5-9 Commando, and he goes, you can even go Recce Troop, which is Commando, Dagger, and Wings. And I thought, okay, didn't really take it on board. But I could see that he knew he wanted me to get as much as I could out of the military. I think at the time he was probably thinking I was going to do about 3 years minimum service, so at least get a trade or something. And so that's what I did. I joined the Royal Engineers and did my little test. It was a touchscreen test at the time to see how intelligent you were, and I passed all that, and I could choose any trade, and I decided to go bomb disposal because I thought it sounded quite sexy. And my dad's like, again, he just marched me straight back over to the careers office, and so he was almost at the beginning just carving my path on what I could get most from the military. So yeah, that's how I ended up in the military. It wasn't something as a young boy that had been my aspirations, or I met guys later on Special Forces selection, and since young boys, all they've ever wanted to do was be a parachute regiment or Royal Marines and SBS or SAS. That wasn't me.
Yeah. How did you find training then, going in then? Because you were 16 years old, 17 years old. How did you fare in training then?
Yeah, it was, I think training, whether you go in Royal Engineers, whether you go in Royal Marines, Air Force or Navy, it's going to be a culture shock from what you used to. Obviously, not so much as a culture shock as nowadays, because we didn't have technology and things like that. But my father, it was all about first impressions. I had to be at Bassingbourn training establishment on the Sunday. And all I'd ever known of Bassingbourn was what I'd seen on Full Metal Jacket. Actually, me and my civvy mates watched that the night before I went off, which probably wasn't the best movie to watch before you going off. And my father, he packed my bag the day before. It was all about first impressions. He packed it all neatly, and I thought, well, I can do that. But I now know why he was doing it. I mean, you had to parade between 8 o'clock in the morning and 5 in the evening. My dad had me there at 5 to 8 in the morning. I was like, really? Personally, I thought he just wanted me out of the house and literally had me out as soon as he could. But now as a soldier myself and an instructor, I could see what he was trying to do, basically get you on a good footing as you go off. But I touched on it about being about 65 kilo and 5'7". We did the basic training, then went on to continuation training in the engineers, and I soon started growing quite quickly. I don't know if it's because you got three good square meals a day and you're training, but it wasn't long before I started putting on weight and growing. And as each time one of the training modules, I was getting confident in my physical ability as well as my mental ability. And it was almost, well, what's next? You know what I mean? And I always had a competitive streak in me, my dad being Army football manager and things like that. So, you know, I had that already instilled in me. I never sort of showed it in front of anyone else. It was more of a personal thing. I used to always, you know, see someone on a BFT and sort of, you know, target them or whatever. So it was something I had naturally already embedded.
Oh, fantastic. So after going and passing training, where was your first deployment to?
Well, my first posting was actually to a engineer regiment, which is in Germany. So my father, touched on, was the Army football manager for the UK. But then you had, at the time, BAOR, British Army over the Rhine. So you had your Army football champions here in the UK. I mean, you had your Army football champions in Germany. And I think it wasn't long. I was trying to hide the fact that my dad was in the engineers. You know, I was trying to keep a low profile, which didn't last long, actually. When I was doing basic training, the 10 weeks basic training, I think on week 5 or 6, you have to write a letter home to your parents inviting them to the passing out parade. So I did that. And then a week later, all I heard was Stott, you know, from the from the main and it was the corps staff sergeant and the corporals. And my father had got a British Empire medal. So he'd replied on his letter, Mr. D. Stott, BEMRE, Royal Engineers. I was like, oh my God. So I ran straight down the corridor and they're like, oh, why didn't you tell us your father was in the engineers? I was like, oh, you didn't ask. And then it then became apparent that one of the corporals actually got jailed by my father when he was in basic training. So the next 4 weeks I was in the press up position, but obviously that exposed me that I was Dave Stott's son. And when I went to continuation training where they do the postings, they said, you're off to Germany. That 2A Engineer Regiment, which was the amphibious engineers, were the Army football champions in Germany. So so that's where I found myself on my first posting. I was very fortunate to go there, quickly go on my PTI course as a young soldier and work in the gym, but soon saw myself following my father's path and decided to change and go to 5-9 Commando.
Oh, absolutely. So after doing all that then, how long were you in the Royal Engineers then before you decided to do Special Forces selection?
Yeah, so I joined in 95 and I went on selection in 2005. So about 10 years. I had done selection 3 years previous, and got injured. So I did 10 years there. The first year was training. The second year I was in Germany, and then I was very fortunate to spend 8 years within 5-9 Commando. I got to 5-9 Commando, and then less than a year was in Recce Troop, was like an elite reconnaissance troop, which is the one my father talked about back in Aldershot, about where you can get your wings and your dagger. And normally you would get posted every 3 years so that you could progress in your career, you know, get diversity, understand the bigger picture of the military. But when I went Recce Troop, it was classed as a posting after a year from 5-9, and then 2 years later became an instructor on the All Arms Commander course. That was classed as a posting for a year. So I managed to spend 8 years there and 7 years within Recce Troop. And my sergeant major pulled me in and he said, right, you now have to leave to progress in your career. So I had put my paperwork in for Pathfinders, which was the airborne reconnaissance troop. But Glasgow, who do manning, had different ideas. I'd just passed my diving supervisors course, and they said, you're going to the Defence Diving School as the senior diving instructor. So I'd managed to go from sapper to sergeant in Recce Troop, you know, and I then moved on as a sergeant to go to school.
Oh, brilliant. Well, I'm going to ask it. I know what the answer is going to be. But how did you find Special Forces selection? Easy or hard?
A mixture of both. It's all about mindset, and having the right approach. I mentioned I'd done selection before 3 years before, and I got injured on that. So what they then introduced during that 3-year period, a lot of guys used to come down on selection. So selection for listeners, whether you're SAS or SBS, is the same course. It's not separate anymore. It's UK SF selection. It's joint. But before that, a lot of guys would come down and they weren't fully aware of what was involved on selection, physically, mentally, admin wise, navigation wise. So a lot of them would find out the hard way and lose their life. They wouldn't be successful. But you only have 2 opportunities on selection. And so that meant they only had 1 more opportunity left. So they then introduced a thing called, what's it called now? It's gone to me. But basically, it's a week. It will come back to me in a minute. I'll remember it in a minute. But it's basically a week with the SBS or a week with the SES, depending which direction you're going. And then on there, you have you do a bit of physical activity, you do a bit of navigational map track. So they then have an idea of where you are fitness-wise, military-wise, your capabilities before selection. And if you're good, they say, right, you can go on the next course. If not, they then advise you what courses to go on. So you're not losing lives and things like that. So when I went on selection the second time, I did it's called a briefing course. That was it. So I did the briefing course with the SBS, and then a week later I did the briefing course with the SES as well. So I did both of them and passed them with no issues at all. So I knew physically I was ready to go. So selection for me was fine. I generally believe that anyone can pass selection with the right mindset, and also staying away from injury. 50% of it is injury. I knew that I had a knee injury from my first selection. I snapped my ankle twice playing football. So, that was my nemesis. So I would always make sure that was protected. And I got through the hills phase, which is quite arduous, which annoys me because it's just called the aptitude. The instructors don't even know your name until you've finished. You think you had a great achievement passing the hills, and it's like, right, selection starts from now. But it's nothing. Everyone has this vision that it's, do triple backward somersaults like ninjas and things like that. And it's not. It's actually just basic soldiering done well. They're not asking anything that you don't know before. Obviously, you get introduced to different weapon systems and communications kit. But I really enjoyed it. The jungle for me was great. Some people find it claustrophobic, but I love wildlife. So for me to be in the jungle was great, and very fortunate to pass. You come out of the jungle, and the instructors have their face to face. Decide who's passed or failed, and you still don't know. You have to wait another 5 days. So it's a lot of mind games. A lot of guys self-critiquing. Some guys may have been given the nod by the instructors. Some guys may not, and it's just and I think that's all part of selection. But I was comfortable. I knew I'd given it my all. So I without sounding arrogant, I had an idea I'd passed.
You can sound arrogant, I think. You can sound arrogant.
I would. I'd be like, yep.
Yeah.
But and what was that like then, Dean? Did you have to, once you were getting, was it the command officer from Poole, I take it then, for you, SBS, did he just invite you in the office and handed Barry a staple belt, or was it just a handshake?
No, so what it is selection is 6 months long. So you start with the hills phase, which is about 4 weeks. You then have the officers then go away, do officers week, while the rest of us do section attacks and some live firing. So everything's live firing. We don't do blanks. Everything from that day on is live. But because you've got new weapon systems, you're having to learn all that. And then also you're doing SOP training for the next 2 weeks before you go to the jungle. And jungle, from the time you leave Hereford and come back, is about 6 weeks. You have 28 days solid in the jungle and then come home. So that takes you to the 3-month period. It's then when they do the cull. It's then when they say whether you've passed or not. But if you've passed, it means that they want you. The next 3 months you can only fail yourself. So, and that's when. Yeah, Yeah, that's when lads start growing their hair and things like that, which for me, I was absolutely frustrated with, because 10 years previous, when I did have hair, I was trying to grow it. And now I just look, I would look like Terry Nutkins if I did that. So then the next 3 months, you then do all you do your para course, your survival, evasion, resistance, extraction, communications training, counter-terrorism. And that's 3 months. And you just, once you'd finished that, then the SAS guys, we used to go to their sergeant's mess. They would be presented the berry and belt, and we had to wait until we went to pool on the Monday to then get ours. But for us, we then continue. We have a 3-month continuation training. We then got to do our diving and our boat course. So it's about 9 months in all.
Oh, absolutely fantastic. I mean, you must have felt, on top of the world. Going and passing that, it does seem like it's, don't want to, big it up too much, but you only the best of the best go and pass that.
You do, yeah. You feel like you're on top of the world on the Friday. The lads get their belt, and because it's important for those that are on the course. But then when you go to the unit on Monday, you then soon realise, they welcome you in. We go to the Frog Bar, we have a few drinks, and the lads will welcome in. But then it's back to work. If you then realise actually you're at the start point within the SF community, you now can slot in the teams, but you need to build on that. I then realised when I was in the SBS that you used to forget about selection. When you're in the military, selection's a huge thing, but when you're in the special forces, it's like, how many lads are passed, and that was it. So yeah, so your bubble bursts quite quickly. You then become the new boy, and for me as well, you lose your rank. So I went on selection as sergeant, and then I start as a trooper. So you lose everything. You start over again, which isn't a bad thing. Less responsibility.
So always a bonus.
Obviously, we can't talk about what you went and did while you were in the SBS. So going and moving forward to your injury, which sadly resulted in you having to go and leave. Do you mind telling us a little bit of how that happened?
Yeah, of course, can. Yeah. So I was very fortunate to join. Not going into too many details. Join Special Forces at the height of the war and terror. It was the busiest time in UK Special Forces history. So for me, I was fortunate to join at that period and get real exposure of everything and all the capabilities of UK Special Forces, and we're very, very quickly soon ticking all the boxes. Which I always say these kids nowadays play Call of Duty. We were doing this day in, day out. So I was about to go back out on another tour to Afghanistan on pre-deployment training, and we do our pre-deployment training in Oman. Great training area there because obviously it replicates the heat. You've got the mobility, you've got the air and everything else. So we were doing, again, we're talking about the new boys. The new boys had just joined the squadron, so they had to get hey-ho trained, high altitude, high opening trained. We were already trained anyway from our previous tours. And so the sergeant major said, well, look, the rest of you guys just go up and do fun jumps. I love parachuting, but, in the military, I don't think there's no such thing as a fun jump. So we went up and jumped, and I'd already done a couple of jumps that day. And one thing I like to do, I tried to get myself to the front, and then we do what's called a frog. So you exit the aircraft, and then you turn back towards the PGI with your hands in the air, and almost like a frog. And it's like one of our signature jumps, which really upsets the RAF parachute jump instructor. So I got moved to the middle of the stick for the next jump, and I'd done hundreds of these jumps before. Exited the aircraft, but straight away I knew there was a problem. I was supposed to be going that way and looking towards the rest of the team. Instead, I was on my back looking up in the sky, and my leg was caught in the lines above my head. So unlike
was that static line, Dean? Or was it?
Unlike free fall where you're clear of lines, this is a static line. So you exit at 15,000 feet, and then the parachute opens, and then you travel up to 50 kilometers or 30 minutes to your target area. So it's a method of insertion. So my worry was to get my leg clear in time before the parachute opened. I couldn't clear it in time, and when it did open, it pulled my leg up over even further and to the right. Thankfully, my heel got clear of the line, and it didn't take my leg completely off. But straight away, the pain. I knew there was a problem. And at 15,000 feet, you're on the limits of oxygen. So I was vomiting. I was also drifting in and out of consciousness because of the pain, but no one else in the team was aware that there was a situation there. So for me, I had to stay with the team and get to the DZ and then sort of assess my situation. So I'm looking down at the GPS. I'm covered in vomit, and I'm trying to deal with this pain. I'm trying to ease the pressure off my harness on my leg. But I watched the other parachutists, their approaches, saw which were successful and which weren't too successful. And I came in and I landed one-legged. It was a great landing. But unfortunately, the damage sustained on the exit ended short in my career. So I tore my ACL, my MCL, and lateral meniscus within the knee, my hamstring, my calf, and my quadricep. So all the supporting muscles as well that went with it. So yeah, unfortunately, I didn't go on that tour, and I didn't go on any tours again after that.
I mean, how do you overcome that psychological hit of going from where you were at to then a transition of then leaving the military?
Yeah, I think for me, I'd done 16 years in the military at that point. For me, I was alive. I was definitely at 22, and I saw a career beyond that within the special forces. So I hadn't looked at Civvy Street. Civvy Street wasn't an option for me at the time. Normally people, when they get to the end of their careers or decide that they're leaving, would have that transition period that they can do their resettlement courses and get themselves ready. I didn't really have much of that. It was flash to bang and you're out. So thankfully, me and my wife's very entrepreneurial. She sort of managed all those sort of civilian admin things that for me I wasn't aware of. But at the time, in reflection, going back, what it was an identity crisis. You've gone from being in a tight-knit unit, having a role and a purpose day in, day out, knowing what you're doing for the next 2 years, really, to now, where do I fit in society? So that was difficult for me. But I think, again, on reflection, I do a lot with the transition with the military. One thing I picked up that was quite early, actually, and I think my wife was very good on that. And I did it myself. I blamed the civilian community, for not understanding me or who I was or what I did. And I was like, they're always late. They don't understand me, blah, blah. When in fact, actually, there's nothing wrong with the civilian community at all. It's us in the military that are unique. We're the ones that are slightly different. And you don't need to fit into our world. We need to somehow fit into your world. And I think it's where a lot of people sort of run into problems on that. But yeah, I got out, and without sounding like Liam Neeson, people with skill sets, natural progression was the private security industry, and so that's what I did. I got embedded into that area. I didn't work for any company. I did a lot of ad hoc work myself, and for me that was a great time as well. I was actually learning a lot more about the cultures, about the politics, stuff that you wouldn't really see in the military. You had a mission and an objective. You had an idea of what was going on, but I was seeing it firsthand from a separate set of eyes as well, and not governed by certain rules of engagement or governments as well.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I mean, Scotty, you went into the kind of private security kind of sector as well when you went and left. Obviously, Scotty, you left for a different reason.
Yeah, I left in 2004 after I did my close protection course in Rona in South Africa. And then came out for that, and then got a wee nice job in London, just looking after a high-profile businessman for a while. And then I got an opportunity to go out and look after the British ambassador in Saudi. So, Sir William Patey. So went out there for about a year and a bit, looked after him and his family and the compound and stuff. But it's you're right. You can pick up more of the culture, you can actually get a better sense when you've actually got your boots on the ground and actually living with the guys. And I was working with the Saudi CP team as well, so it was very good. Pick up a lot of information.
Yeah, well, I know that UKSF. We sometimes use private security XSF guys for int on the ground. For me, I didn't want to do your Afghan Iraqs. I didn't want to do work with these big security companies and do 6 weeks on, 6 weeks off. A lot of my friends had set their own companies up on the east, because east coast of Africa, the piracy was at its peak at this point. So for me, it was more corporate close protection. That's how I originally was going to get into it. I helped set up the British Embassy the DFID project with the British Embassy in Benghazi. Within 4 months to leaving the military. So that was in the height of the Arab Spring. So I was working there, and soon identified the Libyans didn't want it being another Afghan in Iraq when Gaddafi had fallen. But also these larger security companies were charging a lot of money, 6 to 7 figures for crisis management evacuation plans. So I was still trying to find a niche within the industry. My wife had set up our company in a very one-man band. Doing ad hoc, and so that's what I did. I saw an opportunity with these crisis management. So I bought 30 weapons off the black market in Libya, and I buried them between Tunis and Egypt, and just buried comms kit, money, and weapons. And I spent a month in the desert designing my own evacuation plans. And living in Aberdeen at the time, I managed to sell it.
Something similar. Very hot, sandy.
Managed to sell it to a couple of the oil companies, and just sat on it. And then each time I did a job, it was ad hoc, so it would be each task was different. When you tell people in the security industry, I think they think you're a doorman from Club Tropicana. Every job is different. We'd have, I went out to Kurdistan and train their special forces. Your next phone call, you're taking the UAE royal family super yacht from Barcelona to Maldives. Next phone call, you're recovering the World Cup in Brazil. So I was getting so much experience and knowledge, and doing some really sensitive jobs, probably something more sensitive than I was actually when I was in the special forces. And I just finished London Olympics. I was in Benghazi the evening that the American ambassador got killed, and I got a phone call if I could help KCA Deutag, German oil company, get 8 of their engineers safely back to Tripoli, which I did through safe houses. And then because of the success of that, 2 years later, I got a phone call from the Canadian embassy that they were stuck in Libya and needed assistance getting out. So I single-handedly evacuated the Canadian embassy out of Libya, 18 military and 4 diplomats. So I'd now found my purpose within the security industry. I'd now got my name to the top of the pile within that. But that again wasn't. I never had to touch any of my weapons. They're all still in position, in situ if needed. It was all understanding demographics, the politics, the tribal influences, and that's something I picked up from the special forces. Everyone has this perception of offensive action, which is 25% of what we do. But 50% of what we do, which you don't see on the movies, is actually being embedded with locals and understanding the atmospherics and the ground picture, and that's what it was.
Yeah. So moving on from a very high intensity lifestyle, what then made you want to go and cycle 14,000 miles? What made you? Yeah,
I go to the shop most days to get paper. Nothing.
What was it? Was it? Yeah. I mean, there's 2 questions there. What made you want to do it, and how did you find it again?
Yeah, so for me, I came back from that trip to the Canadian embassy. My wife had highlighted I'd only been home 21 days in a 365-day calendar. So again, this was when the second pin dropped for me. I hadn't come to terms with the fact that I'd left the special forces. I was still trying to match that adrenaline rush. And so something had to change. In my book, we're at chapter 16 now. It's called Dead or Divorced. If I carried on doing what I was doing, I'd either be dead or divorced. And so my wife was a property developer, and she said, well, you don't need to be going out taking these risks anymore. She could very much support the family. And so that's what I did. I hung up my security boots and stayed home. My injured leg now was 2 kilos lighter than my good leg. It's about 5 years since the injury. So I just bought a push bike from Amazon, just cycled from the office about 8 miles to the office. I bought a cyclocross because of the potholes in Aberdeen. It wasn't a nice road bike. And but straight away, just being active again, I felt a lot felt a huge weight off my shoulder. It was nice to be physically active. Because considering my time in the military, I got to the position where I was because of my physical robustness. I'd sort of lost that with my injury. I couldn't even run anymore. So it was nice being physically active. You can imagine my backstory. I sat in these meetings with my wife, with these architects and planners. I wasn't really interested. In fact, I was actually, my son was born, so I was the one feeding him with the bottle of milk while my wife was doing all the work. I was like, really, have I ended up in this position? So my wife could see, right, you need to do something. So I always fancied doing a world record. I didn't know what in, but about it was a month before my 40th birthday, so I was getting ground rush of being a middle-aged man. So I said, well, cycling will we do. I knew I had the endurance. I knew I had the mental capacity. I just needed to transfer that into a new sport. And I knew that the cycling wasn't going to affect my knees. So that's what I did. My wife then found the world's longest road, which is 14,000 miles. So it's equivalent, because of the curvature of the earth, it's equivalent to cycling from London to Sydney, and then another 4,000 miles on top of that. Yeah, it's both top of the earth to the bottom of the earth. It's 15 Land's End John O'Groats back to back. So I thought, perfect, quite arrogant of me. Having only cycled 20 miles, I applied for that world record, and Guinness came back, and 6 weeks later said, you've been successful on that. So yeah, that's how I sort of ended up in that position.
Oh, wow.
I just jump in this one, Alex. I was just, obviously, again, I've listened to your book and it's absolutely fantastic. But I love that fact of when you were starting to get into your cycling and you're in Scotland and you're doing bits and bobs. Who was the guy that said you'd be doomed? Remember there was a word in there, doomed? And I think now, goodness me, imagine saying that to someone.
Yeah, so I when I started, I didn't know much about cycling, so I was buying some magazines. I mean, I read a magazine actually, which was, and there was a guy in there who was talking about the science of the sport, about weight, body ratio, power, and all this stuff I wasn't really aware of. So I went down to meet them in London. And they got behind the project, but they were more fixated on they were getting their money each month rather than the project in hand. So I was supposed to, so I'd met him in the September, and I was supposed to start training full time from the January. So I needed to transition from what I was doing, hand that over to the wife. So in January we would set off. So Prince Harry and I did a promo video together on it, so that we talk about the charity that we did at Four Heads together. And we did that in the September as well. And he said, look, well, what training are you going to do? And I said, well, I'm going to do 50. I'm going to do Land's End John O'Groats, because it's 15 back to back. He said, would I do it with some of the members of Invictus Games? I said, yes, of course. So we set a timeline for about March, April for that. So when I got introduced as coach, we started training. I was doing training, and then he changed the training plan on the day. And I said, well, you have to give me more notice. You can't just change it from 50 miles to 100 miles because, I've still got the kids at school and things like that. It's difference between 3 to 4 hours cycling and 7 to 8 at the time. So, and he said, well, if we want to be ready for Land's End John O'Groats in March, we need to get it in, otherwise we're doomed. And I was just like, I said, this guy... And he just wasn't listening to me. And this guy clearly didn't understand me. So I remember I was on a train at the time coming back from Newcastle. And so I rang my mate and I said, what are you doing next week? And he said, I knew he was in the security and she had a bit of time off. So he said nothing. So I then spoke to the SBS Association. They had a motorhome. And I said, right, I'm just going to do Land's End John O'Groats. And I'd only been cycling about 3 weeks. And and he's like, well, this guy's like, well, you're not bike fit, cadence, you don't know much about cycling. And I just ignored him anyway. And I did it. I did it in 9 days in the middle of November. Did it all completely wrong. It was freezing, But for me, it was just to prove a point to this guy. Look, we're not doomed. If you take away all that distractions of work, business, kids, and things like that, and all you got to do is that, and then that's what you do. And so that's why I changed my coach. I then found a guy in Aberdeen, Ken Bryson from Total Endurance, and he got it. Never, when I came in, he never doubted it. I said, well, I'm going to cycle the world's longest road, break a world record. He never said, oh, well, you might be doomed or things like that. It's all about, this positive attitude.
Positive, yeah.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. I then learned about cadence. I then got bike fit, which is actually measurements to your bike, which I wasn't aware of. And then we did it again. We did John O'Groats Land's End. I did it reverse a few months later, but that was a lot easier for me. But I understand that a lot of listeners, cyclists, it's a bucket list for some, but for me it was a training ride, and I just had to approach it as that.
Oh wow! I mean, so you've done that. You've smashed you've smashed Land's End to John O'Groats. It was easy for you. I'm pretty sure it was. And then, so then, how did you then get over to America then to do the Pan America Highway?
Yeah, so obviously during this time I was training throughout the year. You know, I looked at the conditions that I'd be cycling through. So the Atacama Desert is the driest non-popular desert in the world. It's 47 degrees centigrade when I was there. So I went out to Dubai and did training out there so I could sort of replicate those situations. You know, I went out to Thailand. My friend had a gym out there. I did some, you know, I mixed up my training really. But also during this training period, I'm also looking for sponsors and charities down in London as well. There's a lot. It's a huge project. I set a target of £1 million as well. And so we got a sponsor on board, St. James's Place Wealth Management, in the October. And the reason for that was that the campaign we were doing for was Heads Together. It was a mental health campaign, you know, fronted by William, Harry and Kate. So that had gone live in April 17 with the London Marathon. Of course, then a lot of people were talking about mental health. So it was just good timing with my bike ride, with them coming on board as a charity. So yeah, they came on board. Originally I was setting off on the 1st of March, but they said, we've got an event at the end of January. An annual company meeting, can I guest speak in front of 10,000 at the O2 Arena? And I said, yeah, of course. But for me, I wasn't happy to go down to London, do all the PR, the launch, then go home for a couple of weeks to then fly to. So I spoke to my wife and the team, and I was physically ready to go, mentally ready to go. Logistically, we were there. So I moved it forward to the 1st of February. So I said goodbye to my kids, just so I was getting in the right mindset for the challenge. Said goodbye to my kids, went down to London, and we did all that, the TV, the radio, the launch night. We had the event, the annual company meeting. And then that evening they raised £265,000 and then matched it pound for pound. So before I'd even set off, we had £530,000 raised. So the next morning I then flew from Gatwick to set off on the challenge. It took about nearly 3 days to get from London to southern Argentina.
Oh, and then you started it. And I mean,
then we started it. You know, the world record at the time was 117 days. I was aiming for 110. It wasn't because I wanted to smash it by a week. It was like when I'd done the planning and research, there's things that are out of control, like natural disasters, coups, you know, third-party influence as well. And also for listeners, everyone else went north-south. I decided to go south-north. I just sort of spoke to the previous record holders, and all their issues were in South and Central America. So I thought I'd address those issues early, get them out of the way, and so decided to go the opposite route of everyone else. But yeah, it didn't come without issues, you know. Strong winds in Patagonia, a whole week of 40-mile-an-hour crosswinds. You know, I crashed my bike in Chile on day 13 into a sign. Sounds like I was blind. I wasn't. And then, you know, food poisoning twice in Peru. You know, got knocked off my bike in Colombia. You know, it had its issue. Had issues along the way.
Yeah. So how many miles are you cycling a day? Was, you know, the average? Obviously, you know, you went and said some days were better than others, but what was the planned average?
So we had a planned average before we went out. You know, how we were going to hit the target. You know, going south north. Other than the first week, I think I was 39 miles behind target on the first week. My target was still a week ahead of the world record. From then on, I was getting bigger numbers as we went on. The cycling in South and Central America was different from North America because of security reasons, and my support team and documentary team a bit more risk averse. It was first light to last light. But then it sort of changed then when we got to North America, because I had another target to hit, which we'll probably talk about. But in total, it worked out. I know I completed it in 99 days. We had 5 days off, 3 due to weather and 2 logistics. So it was 94 days cycling. So it worked out, if you were to do an average, or 147 miles a day.
Oh, how do you give yourself that mindset? What were you thinking? I mean, for any listeners here who are bored in lockdown and are cycling but are struggling at the moment, what advice would you go and give to them?
I think for me, it was all about, I broke it all down. I didn't look at the 14,000 miles. I broke that into countries, broke it into days, and broke it in 4 stages. All I would do is have big breakfast and cycle as fast as I could for 2 hours. I then just get off the bike, have food and water, but quite disciplined in my timings. It was 30 minutes and I was back on. And I wouldn't look at the next day, that afternoon, or the next week. I just look at the next 2 hours. So for me, in my head, I was just doing 4 training rides a day. I wasn't doing a world record. But I also made sure that I hit my objectives for the day as well. See people coming off on their challenges saying, I'm 10 miles behind today, I'll catch it up tomorrow. But you don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, and you can have another bad day and then be behind. So that will play with you mentally. So I always made sure I hit my targets, or was ahead of targets. And like I said, after the first week, I was 39 miles behind target, but that was still a week ahead of the world record. So that was the worst position I was in on the whole challenge. So I then got great tailwinds through Peru. And then as I was getting the bigger miles, I was like physically, mentally getting stronger. It was like, well, what else? How much more can I do? So anything less than 150 miles at some point wasn't enough.
Oh, I mean, you then went and smashed it completely again. You broke 2 world records. Do you just quickly tell us those world records and what it was like to hear that as well?
So the South America world record was 58 days. Sorry, that's mine.
That's all right.
58 days, and I did it in 48 days. So I took 10 days off that world record, which was great as a mental boost going into the second half of the challenge. A lot of people messaged me and said, well, that's it now. You've broken the world record. You can, that was a Brucey bonus on the way for me. That was almost like a tick off along the way. I got to North America on day 70 and I was 14 days ahead. And I was like, perfect. I can take a day's rest again, here or there. And then my wife rang me and told me invited to Harry and Meghan's wedding, which changed the dynamics completely of the challenge. So going in to the phone call, I was 14 days ahead. 10 minutes later, I'm now a day behind. So I had to change the way that I cycled in North America. We talked about the security in South and Central America. Majority of my cycling in North America was done at night when the winds had subsided. So I had we had 60-mile-an-hour winds and tornadoes in Texas. So I was stuck for another 24 hours. So I was now 2 days behind. So I had to cycle 340 miles in the next 36 hours to miss the next weather window. So I was just playing chess with Mother Nature through North America. So we had 17 days planned and I cycled it in 11 and a half days. And so I managed to get that time again. So yeah, it wasn't the original plan. And I came in 99 days, 12 hours and 56 minutes, which was, 17 days ahead of the world record. But I do say, if I'd known about the Royal Wedding at the beginning and things like that, there was also another cyclist who come out on social media a week before I was finishing. And he's got 3 other endurance world records, sponsored by Red Bull, all these big brands. And he said that he was going to cycle it and be the first man to do it under 100 days. So again, listening to that when I was a week outside, I could have been quite comfortable with my position I was in and take the world records and go to the wedding. But I was like, no, let's push it. And so, yeah, I came in under that 100 days and took that opportunity away from him.
Unbelievable. One of the things that I took from it, Dean, and I've actually downloaded it myself, was when you were chatting about the weather conditions and using some of the weather to your advantage, it was Windy TV.
Windy TV, yeah.
I've subsequently I've downloaded that and I use it every time I go away in the caravan. And we were up the north peninsula of Donegal, and we had all set up, and I had it on the iPad, Windy TV, and I put my Jeep in front of our awning because the winds were horrendous.
Yeah.
And then I was watching it every 10 minutes. It's moving round to about there. So I moved the Jeep again And everybody else is looking at me like this guy's nuts. But the next morning, I was the only guy with a caravan in place and an awning. So thanks very much for that.
It's a great app. You know, it gives you the strength and directions every hour and that's what I did in North America. That day that I was stuck in Texas, windy TV. I just put pen to paper. So, you know, the great thing about, you know, I did a lot of planning and preparation before this challenge, but actually the success of the challenge was being reactive to the situation, changing the plan as it was changing on the ground.
Oh, absolutely brilliant. Well, I'm very conscious of time, Dean. I know you've only got 10 minutes left.
Oh, evening.
So I'm just going to quickly ask my final question, and then I'm going to open it up to the floor.
Yeah.
So as a military family charity, we'd just like to know, what does family mean to you?
Family is massive. Family is a massive thing. You know, I genuinely believe, you know, for me personally, you know, with this record and things, you know, anyone can break a world record if you have that right support network around me, you know. So for me to be able to concentrate on what I do, and I knew that I had the support of my wife and my kids and everyone else. And so guys and girls in the military, you know, they go through similar things. For them to be able to do what they need to do, they have to have that strong support network. But also it has to be two ways as well. You know, when you're home, you know, you need to look after that family as well. So charities like yours are great for that, because it's very easy to sort of like get disconnected from your family and just be so focused on what you're doing. So, you know, bringing them together and making them, you know, feel important and let them know how important they are is key. So that's one thing I am conscious of as well. You know, is that family bond.
Oh, absolutely brilliant. Fantastic answer there. All right, lads, the floor is open to you. Throw in any questions.
Yeah, I think your wife has clearly played a major role. And I remember being told by some senior officer years ago, he just went, listen to your wife.
Yeah.
And because they know us so well, you know, you mentioned the time when you were given permission to hang up your boots, as it were. Yeah, and it's that sort of closeness and interdependence. I find, I think you find it the same, that enables you to, you know, crack on, because someone's going to tell you when to stop, and it's going to be your other half. He goes, it's time to stop that now.
Yeah, no one knows you. No one knows you more than your wife, and it's all about communication. That's where we realised actually it was I've been disconnected from society. I mean, when we started talking, then it was you know, she understood more. But yeah, you're right, completely.
And what did your dad make of your transition from, you know, wanting to go to bomb disposal and being marched back to where you got to?
Yeah, so my father didn't see the bike ride. He passed away in 2014, but he did see me go to SBS, and we had a fathers on board day where you can bring your dad into the unit. He gets to shoot all the guns and things like that. And I was, you know, being the senior dive instructor in the army, I found myself on all the dive jobs and tasks and things like that. So on that day, I was the guy climbing a ladder. But I remember him buying the SBS bronze statue of the MCT climber. But yeah, no, very, very proud he was as well. Yeah, and a long way from your last 2 minutes.
yeah, absolutely. And I have one other one, which was when your leg was sort of up there. How long was that drop? How long? Because that must have. There was nothing you could do other than focus on getting the ground and try and stay conscious. I mean, that's a hell of a long time, I think.
It was 30 minutes. It's about 30 minutes in the air, yeah. And obviously, you can't just go with the flow. You still need to be navigating as well. So you still need to be doing your job. And like I say, no one else in the team was aware there was a situation at that point. We have voice comms, but there's not really much I could tell him. I could say I've got a sore leg. That wasn't really going to go down well. So I just needed to let them carry on. Ground. Yeah.
Scotty, do you have any final questions before we shall let Dean go?
Absolutely, Dean. I'll not keep you too long, but one of the ones that I've picked up is the sort of motto and quote that you guys use quite a lot was the unrelenting pursuit of excellence.
Yeah.
And I love that. And I've kind of taken it on board myself with the stuff I've been doing, my own personal recovery journey. And again, we're talking about family network, and sometimes we forget about the other halves. But I think if we put that, again, unrelenting pursuit of excellence into marriage, every sort of aspect in life, I think that unity will be a lot stronger. Is that something, the same sort of motto you still follow to this day in all the jobs and opportunities you have?
I think it's a great ethos because, it's not just in the military, it's not just in sport. It's an ethos you can take into anything you do, whether you work in finance, whether you're a carpenter, or whether, even in a marriage. As long as you're giving it your 100%, you do it to the best of your ability. And I sort of emphasize that your ability, because everyone is very quick to, especially social media, compare themselves with others. You know what I mean? And I think that's where a lot of people sort of get caught up in that, but as long as you can sleep at night knowing that you've given it your 100%, then you can't ask for more.
Oh, absolutely fantastic. Well, Dean, thank you so much for today. This has been absolutely fantastic. A great podcast.
Yeah. So glad we managed to make it happen.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely brilliant. And thank you everyone for going and listening. Make sure to follow Dean on his social media, and I will put his website in the link in the description. So make sure to go and click that for all his information there. Make sure to like and subscribe to all the Give Us Time social media pages. And just thank you very much for listening, everyone. So thank you very much.